For 21 days, not a single drop had fallen from the heavens above Valentine. The air hung still and lifeless, as though the very atmosphere was afraid to disturb what was unfolding below. Fine particles of earth danced along the main thoroughfare, wrapping themselves around leather boots and wooden cartwheels, while even the ground seemed to avert its gaze from the shameful spectacle. Behind the weathered walls of the Final Call Tavern, a crude stage had been assembled from discarded boxes, and weathered lumber hastily constructed yet solid enough to bear the weight of disgrace. The townspeople had assembled well before midday, some driven by tedium, others by malice, and a select few carrying silver coins and emptiness where their hearts should be. A gaunt figure in a liquor-stained jacket shuffled a battered card deck, as if existence itself were merely another wager. This was Harland Creed, a man who never waited for misfortune to visit instead. He pulled it along like a broken wagon overflowing with obligations and offspring. Standing with a gambler's sneer, his facial hair twitching as he announced bids that hadn't yet materialized. 3 capable young women, he shouted, one skilled in the kitchen, one ready for companionship, one whose voice can lull your weary spirit to rest. The daughters stood to his side, each frozen like sculptures carved from different varieties of anguish. The eldest, Molly, kept her arms crossed and her chin raised, eyes razor-sharp and unwavering. She wore her suffering like protective armor. Next to her, June appeared half wild, fingers balled into fists, her jaw trembling with restrained fury. Mabel, the youngest, positioned herself slightly behind her sister's eyes, vacant. Murmuring melodies only she could hear, her small frame swaying softly from across the town square. A figure observed them from beneath the shadow of a cart. He appeared to be 40 years old, though his gaze held 6 decades of experience. Thomas Granger was known to most only in passing, the owner of the Pinewood Ranch beyond Red Hollow, a man who rarely ventured to town except when the water ran dry or storms damaged his fencing. His beard showed threads of premature silver, his shoulders broad yet weary. 3 adult sons sat behind him on the wagon seat, shifting restlessly, glancing between their father and the gathered crowd. Thomas hadn't come for any auction. His needs were simple: salt, nails, and 2 pounds of coffee beans. But destiny doesn't announce itself politely. Cuts like steel and leaves. You wondering how blood came to stain your hands? He observed as Molly's eyes swept the crowd, meeting each gaze, challenging anyone to dare. No wedding band adorned her finger, no infant clung to her side, no guardian stood in her only backbone and grief worn like a second skin. June's mouth twisted at a man in a brown waistcoat who cackled too loudly. Mabel blinked at the sun, lips continuing their silent song. Thomas adjusted his position. The youngest girl reminded him of his deceased wife's sister at 13, delicate bones and graceful features, but not fragile. Simply exhausted, aged beyond her years by experiences no child should endure. Harlan's voice echoed, "Again, let's not pretend innocence will last long. Better to claim them before the saloon owners. Bidding starts at $15 each, or 40 for all 3. A silence descended, not the natural kind, but the type torn from a room like breath, stolen from lungs. No one spoke. Even the breeze paused. Thomas descended from his wagon. His boots stirred dust as he moved, deliberate and unhurried, past townsmen who suddenly found their footwear or the sky worthy of intense study. He remained silent until reaching the platform. "Release them," he stated simply. Harlan blinked. "What?" Thomas's voice didn't escalate. It didn't need to. "Tired daughters, and step down from that platform before I send you flying into next week." Harlan scoffed. "Who do you think you are?" "A man who's witnessed enough cowards selling what they destroyed while claiming it remains intact." He turned toward the crowd. "You all came to observe. I hope you choke on what you witnessed. This isn't entertainment, and they aren't livestock." Harlan's hand moved toward his coat, but Thomas's stare landed like a rifle sight. The gambler wavered, then spat onto the planks and retreated, muttering curses into his collar. The girls remained motionless. Thomas looked toward Molly. "You're free to depart, but if you have nowhere to go, I have a house with rooms that don't leak." I have sons who know their boundaries and soup that doesn't run thin. You won't be indebted to me." Molly's eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because someone should have intervened long ago, and because I gain nothing by standing here." He turned then, walking back toward the wagon, as the crowd parted around him like sheep suddenly reminded of the wolf among them. For a moment, nothing stirred. Then Molly stepped down. Her sisters followed, Mabel still humming. They climbed into the wagon's back, settling between feed sacks and rope coils. None spoke. Thomas didn't look back. The road leading from town was narrow and bordered by brittle cottonwoods. The wagon groaned. Caleb, the youngest son, kept peering over his shoulder, trying not to stare. Mark offered Mabel wrapped candy from his pocket. She accepted it with a small nod, unwrapping it, as though it might vanish. At the ranch, the porch sagged slightly from age, but remained clean. A yellow dog barked once and wagged its tail. The sun was beginning to descend, and shadows stretched long across the yard. Thomas showed them the house. 1 room per girl, beds prepared, windows secured, nothing elaborate. "Is this a prison? Or kindness?" June muttered. "Whatever you need it to be," Thomas replied, leaving them there unsupervised. That night, he slept in the barn. The following morning arrived softly, pale light filtering through the kitchen window. Molly stood beside the stove, staring at the unlit firebox. June was already outside, kicking at stones. Mabel sat in a corner, with a dull spoon and tin plate, tapping it softly like percussion. Thomas stood in the doorway, coffee mug in hand. His eldest son, Levi, leaned beside him. "What should we do?" Levi asked, not with resentment, just quiet confusion. "Let them breathe," Thomas said. They did. Days drifted by like falling leaves. The girls spoke little. They ate, assisted when asked, but kept to themselves. Thomas never pressured them. Then one evening, Molly sat on the porch after supper, arms wrapped around her knees. The sun disappeared. Behind the hills, painting the fields gold and crimson, Thomas sat beside her, silent. She spoke first. "You have no idea what he did to us." "No," he said, "and I don't need to. You're here now." Molly looked at him, something fierce and flickering in her eyes. "You can't save people like us." "I'm not trying to save you," he said, "just giving you somewhere to stop running." She looked down, her fingers curled around the porch rail. "You think we're suitable to be around your sons?" "I think you're suitable to be anywhere you choose." There was a long pause. Then she nodded once. "Then we'll stay," she said. "For now." Thomas rose, his knees creaking. "That's enough." Behind them, fireflies blinked into the dusk, illuminating the yard with tiny, careless sparks. Inside, Mabel's voice could be heard humming again, softer this time. And June, somewhere near the barn, released a laugh no one expected. Thomas looked toward the horizon where night was consuming the light. 3 sisters had come to him like strays at the door, and he'd opened it without understanding why. But some things don't require reasons. It's only a little space, and a man willing to remember that mercy, like rain, comes slowly but softens even the hardest ground. The morning after the girls arrived, the Granger house felt transformed. Not louder, not fuller, just different, like a wind had changed direction. And no one quite knew whether it brought storm or spring. Thomas rose before dawn, as always. He moved through the kitchen with his usual quietness, placing a kettle on the stove and grinding beans slowly, as if noise might wake something still fragile. He didn't see Molly already sitting at the table until he turned. She didn't speak, just nodded once. Her eyes were sharp but tired, and she held a chipped mug in both hands like it anchored her. She hadn't poured coffee yet. She was waiting for warmth or welcome. He nodded back and poured 2 mugs. They drank in silence, a kind of treaty. Outside, frost still clung to the fence posts. The barn roof gleamed like bone under the thin morning light. Thomas's sons were already up. Levi splitting logs near the shed, Caleb brushing down the mare, Mark trying and failing to fix the crooked chicken coop door again. Inside the house, the girls stirred slowly. June padded barefoot across the wooden floor, her shoulders wrapped in a quilt. She narrowed her eyes at Thomas, then walked past him without a word. Settling beside Molly, Mabel came last, dressed in the same clothes from the day before, her hair a tangle of sleep. She didn't speak, just leaned her head against June's arm. June blinked but didn't pull away. Thomas cleared his throat gently. "You'll have your own rooms," he said, voice low and warned. "No locks. No one will enter without knocking. If there's anything you need, you can ask." Molly looked at him. "And what do you expect from us?" He shook his head. "Nothing you don't want to give? Then why? I told you already. House was empty. You needed one." The silence that followed wasn't hostile. Just long, the kind that needs space to be understood. Later that day, the girls explored the house. Molly found her room by the east window. June took the smallest room, perhaps out of stubbornness. Mabel chose the one with a faded drawing pinned to the wall, done in child's charcoal-a-tree with stars in the branches. The house had only one bathroom, and the plumbing worked when it felt inclined. Still, it was warm, clean, and quiet. The girls didn't seem to know what to do with that. The boys kept their distance. I watched from afar, always working, rarely talking. He moved like a man born with a burden tied to his spine. Mark tried to be friendly, but was too nervous to be casual. His laughter came too fast, too bright, like a candle flickering in wind. Caleb, the youngest, barely looked up when spoken to. He wasn't shy, just uncertain. He stole glances at Molly but looked away quickly, as if it stung to hold her gaze. Molly watched them all. She didn't trust easily. She moved through the house like someone who expected doors to lock behind her. She kept a knife under her pillow, not hidden, just known. A declaration. That second night she sat by the fireplace and asked Thomas, "Were you ever cruel?" He didn't flinch. "No." "Then were you ever weak?" His eyes stayed on the flames. "Yes." Molly nodded as if that made him real. Meals were quiet affairs. The girls cooked when they felt like it. The boys washed dishes without being asked. The balance was uncertain. A dance, no one knew the steps to, but no one raised their voice. No one raised their hand. June clashed with Levi the first time they spoke. She had left her muddy boots in the hallway. He asked her, plain as rain, to move them. "You run this place like a church," she snapped.
"Oh,"
he said, "but I built that floor, and I'd like it to last." Her jaw tensed, but she moved the boots. Later, she brought extra kindling without a word. Mark caught Mabel humming again as she walked the fence line. He didn't interrupt, just followed at a distance, fixing a broken gate latch behind her. She glanced at him once, blinked, then kept humming. The house began to breathe again. Thomas spent most evenings outside, not far, just on the porch, carving little birds from cedar scraps. Used to make them for his wife before she passed. He didn't tell the girls that. He didn't need to. On the fourth day, Molly stepped into the barn. She watched Caleb work the hay bales, arms tense, movements sharp. He saw her and dropped the pitchfork. "Sorry," he muttered, backing up. "I'm not a rattlesnake," she said. "I know," he said quickly, then added, "You move quiet is all." She looked at him for a long beat. "You're afraid of me?" "No," he said, honest and unflinching. "I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing." She tilted her head. "Then don't say anything." He nodded, and they stood in silence. She didn't mind it. That evening, Mark tried to make a joke at dinner, something about the mule being smarter than all three brothers combined. June nearly smiled. Mabel laughed out loud for the first time. It echoed across the table, high and clear. Even Thomas chuckled, soft and brief. Later that night, Molly passed Thomas on the porch. "You didn't ask what happened to our mother," she said. "I figured if you wanted me to know, you'd say." She nodded. "He sold her first to a man in Kansas. We never saw her again." "I'm sorry. We stopped being sorry a long time ago." He offered her the bird he'd carved that night, a dove, simple and unfinished. She took it without a word. Mabel found an old sewing kit in the hall drawer and started stitching scraps of cloth into something small and shapeless. June began wearing her hair in braids again. Molly started waking earlier, not because she had to, but because the quiet before dawn felt like her own. One afternoon, June followed Levi to the well. "You always so serious?" she asked. "Mostly why?" "Someone's gotta be." She smiled faintly. Maybe not anymore. He blinked. Right. Maybe not. The sky that night turned violet before the stars came out. Mabel sat under the window with her thread and cloth, humming the same tune. Mark carved a little flute from a cane reed and offered it to her. She took it, played one note, and nodded. Thomas sat alone again, watching shadows shift on the porch. Molly joined him, arms crossed, eyes half-lidded. "You think this will work?" she asked. "I don't know what this is yet." She didn't smile, but she didn't walk away that night before the lamps were turned out. The girls gathered in Mabel's room not to talk, just to sit back to back, shoulder to shoulder. 3 sisters in 3 empty rooms, now not quite so empty. A silence fell over. The house, not fearful, but full of breath. A stillness that held possibility. And in that quiet, something began to take root. Something patient, something real. Spring arrived not with fanfare but with whispers. The snow melt sliding lazily down the hills, the creek swelling just enough to sing again. The fence lines held steady this year, and the wind blew softly through the bare cottonwoods, whispering to buds too shy to bloom just yet. Inside the Granger house, change came just as slowly. Nothing grand, nothing spoken, just the quiet rearrangement. Of lives stitched side by side, Molly began her mornings with the broom, sweeping the hallway from back to front without being asked. It was not obedience, it was control over something, anything. June took to the porch steps at dusk, sharpening knives with slow, deliberate strokes, more out of ritual than fear. And Mabel had turned the storage closet into a place all her own, stringing threads across the wall, weaving bits of fabric into something unnamed. Thomas watched without comment. He understood the power of stillness. He knew healing didn't gallop it, walked barefoot, careful not to startle the pain beneath. The boys had settled too. Levi repaired the barn roof with Molly nearby, neither speaking, both working. Mark managed to coax a laugh from June every third attempt. Caleb sometimes lingered by Mabel's doorway, not speaking, just listening to her hum. It was the middle of April when the well went dry. Thomas stood over it one morning, bucket drawn up with nothing but grit and regret. He scratched his beard, sighed low, and looked toward the river. 1/2 mile down the slope, by midday, chain of buckets had formed sons and daughters alike, walking the path down and back with the rhythm of necessity. No one complained. No. One paused. Even Mabel joined, carrying a tin pail nearly half her size, determined. That evening, as they sat on the porch, Molly looked at Thomas and said, "We should dig another well." He raised a brow. "That's so?" She nodded. "I'll help." "So will I," said Levi. The next morning, the digging began. Slow, sweaty, stubborn work, the kind that grinds conversation into silence, where the only sound is shovel biting earth and breath. Pulled from lungs, Molly didn't hesitate. She worked beside Levi, sleeves rolled, hair tied, blistering her hands without flinching. At noon, Thomas brought bread and apples. They sat in the dirt, sun-baking their backs. "You ever build anything?" Levi asked her. Molly looked at him. "Once, a shed. It collapsed." He grinned. "Then you've got a good start." That night, she soaked her hands in salt water, wincing only once. Caleb left a jar of ointment outside her door. No note. She used it. The next day, June asked Mark to teach her how to saddle a horse properly. He blinked at her like he hadn't. "Heard well?" she said, hand on her hip. He scrambled to say yes. They spent the afternoon in the corral. June cursed the cinch strap, cursed the heat, cursed the dust, then finally laughed. Not loud, not careless, but a real, unguarded sound that startled even the mare. Mark didn't say much, he just smiled. She saw it, and her laughter stopped, softening into something unreadable. "Don't get ideas," she muttered. Double quotes. "No, ma'am." "Stop calling me ma'am." "Yes, June." She didn't correct him. Inside the house, Mabel had started cooking. At first, it was burnt potatoes and dry cornbread. Then came soft eggs, tart apple tarts, warm biscuits that tasted like memory. She baked without fuss, humming old melodies as she mixed and kneaded. Caleb hovered more each day, offering to fetch flour, split wood, carry buckets. "You don't have to help," she said once. "I want to," he replied, not meeting her eyes. She handed him a spoon and pointed to the bowl. "Then stir clockwise. No cheating." Evenings became quieter in a different way, not hollow, not cautious, peaceful. Levi played the fiddle on the porch. Mark told stories that had no real endings. June listened, leaning against the post, arms crossed but relaxed. Molly sometimes joined, sitting beside Thomas, not touching, not talking, just being. One night she finally asked, "Why haven't you asked us to leave?" Thomas shrugged. "You haven't tried to leave? Would you stop us?" "No." "Then why do you care?" Took his time answering. "'Cause life's been cruel to good people too many times. I figure it's time someone held the door open instead of shutting it." She nodded slowly. "Not many men think that way." "No, but more should." In the barn, Caleb showed Mabel how to twist rope. She twisted hers backward. He corrected her with a nervous smile. She laughed and did it wrong again on purpose. "You always this patient?" she asked. He thought about it. "Only with things that matter." She stared at him a moment too long, then passed him the coil. The new well came together in 6 days. Not deep, not perfect, but enough. Molly and Levi had carved each layer like it was a promise. When water finally filled the bottom, dark and steady, Molly leaned on her shovel and grinned. "You didn't think I'd stick it out," she said. Levi wiped his brow. Didn't think anything, just hoped. Hope's dangerous. He met her eyes. So's giving up. That night they all sat together for supper. No lines drawn, no eyes downcast. The stew was warm, the biscuits golden. June passed the salt to Mark without a word. Mabel laid her fork down gently, hands folded, content. Thomas raised his glass of water. They laughed. Even Molly smiled, lips pressed but real. Later, as dusk blanketed the sky and the porch lights glowed dim, Molly walked beside the garden. Roses still bare, but waiting. Levi joined her. He didn't speak. She didn't either. But she handed him the trowel and gestured to the soil. "Plant something," she said. "If it lives, it lives. If not, we try again." And he did. In the stillness of that night, the house no longer felt like it was holding its breath. It exhaled slow, steady, and somewhere deep in the quiet soil, things began to grow. The days had fallen into rhythm. Morning chores, warm suppers, quiet smiles traded across porch rails. Laughter no longer startled anyone. The girls no longer flinched when boots hit floorboards. Spring had tucked its fingers into the seams of the Granger house, patching old wounds with sunlight and steady hands. Then came the rider. He arrived on a Tuesday just before sundown. The horizon still wore the day's gold, but the wind shifted. Sharp with a scent no one liked: sweat, tobacco, and gun oil. His horse kicked dust as it halted at the fence line, nostrils flaring. The man didn't dismount. Thomas stepped out first. Wiping his hands on a rag, he didn't reach for a weapon, just watched. His son stood behind him, silent. The girls appeared slowly in the doorway, Molly's hand instinctively reaching back to steady Mabel. The rider leaned forward. "Looking for what's mine," he said. No one answered. Harlan Creed pulled off his hat and spat into the dirt. His hair was longer than before, more silver than blonde, and his eyes twitched with sunburnt anger. The revolver at his hip gleamed clean. "Oiled, ready? You think I forgot?" he called, louder now. "You think you could just walk off with them like they were yours to keep?" Thomas stepped off the porch, slow and measured. "They walked away from you. They're still mine by law." "No, they're not," Harlan smirked. "This ain't a courtroom, friend." Thomas's jaw tightened. "That's right. It's a home. You ain't welcome here." Mark moved closer to June. Caleb stepped in front of Mabel. Levi didn't move at all. But his stance was a storm waiting to break. Molly stepped forward, her voice cut clean through the air. "We're not yours. We're not for sale. We're not going anywhere." Harlan looked at her, then at the house, the barn, the fields behind them. "You think this little setup changes anything? You think a few home-cooked meals and soft words make you something better than what you were?" "No," Molly said, "but it makes us free." "Free," he laughed, short and bitter. "You're a bunch living off charity." Levi stepped forward, face hard. "Say that again? Why? You planning to fight me over someone else's mistake?" Thomas raised a hand, stopping Levi's next step. His voice stayed low. "I'm only going to ask once more. Leave." Harlan dismounted slowly. The revolver stayed in its holster, but his hand hovered. "You think I'm alone?" From the trail came to more riders, younger men, rough-looking, scarred. Harlan jerked a thumb toward them. "They're here to see justice done." Caleb swallowed hard. Mark clenched his jaw. The girls didn't move. Molly's gaze never left Harlan's. June's fingers flexed at her sides. Mabel stepped back behind the doorframe. The standoff stretched long and quiet. Then from the distance, hooves sounded, another rider coming fast from the opposite ridge. Dust curled up behind him. It was the sheriff. He pulled up hard beside Harlan, looking over the scene with weary eyes. "Something I should know about?" he asked, scanning the tense silence. Harlan gestured wide. "This man stole my daughters, took them like property." The sheriff looked at Thomas, then at Molly. "That true?" "No," Molly said. "We left. He was selling us on a crate outside the saloon. This man offered us safety. Nothing else." "I got witnesses," Harlan said. "I got bruises," June snapped. "Count those too." Sheriff dismounted slower now. He looked older than his badge, weary of this kind of trouble. He scratched his beard, then glanced toward Thomas. "You take them in?" "I opened my door," Thomas said. "They walked in on their own." "You planning to marry them off?" Harlan asked, venom behind the grin. "Turn them into Granger property?" "No one belongs to anyone here," Thomas said. The sheriff turned back to the girls. "You want to stay?" "Yes," Molly said. The sheriff nodded slowly. "Then I ain't got cause to move them." Harlan stepped forward, furious. "You're siding with them?" "With him?" "I'm siding with what the law says," the sheriff muttered. "And the law don't recognize daughters as debt collateral."
"Dow."
"But there," the sheriff cut him off with a look. "Say one more word, Harlan, and I'll have you locked for public threat and trespass." Harlan's lip curled. He turned to his men, snarled something under his breath. The three of them stood a moment longer, trying to hold the ground with pride alone. Then Harlan spat in the dirt again, turned to his horse, and mounted. "This ain't the end of it," he said, voice low. Thomas didn't blink. "It is here." They rode off, hooves thudding like closing doors. The sheriff lingered a moment, then tipped his hat. "You've got a hard piece here, Thomas. Don't lose it." "You won't," Thomas said. The sheriff rode off. Silence returned, thick and shivering. Levi exhaled. Mark looked like he might shake apart. Caleb stepped back inside, wordless. Molly turned to Thomas. "You didn't have to do that." He met her eyes. "Yes, I did." She looked like she might say more, but the words never formed. Later, when the lanterns were lit and the dinner table full, again, no one spoke about the man with the gun or the law that hadn't come soon enough. They talked about the well and the planting and the mare set to foal next week. Molly sat across from Caleb. June passed Mark the cornbread. Levi refilled Mabel's cup without needing to ask. After supper, Thomas sat on the porch, knife in hand. Whittling again, Molly joined him. For the first time, she didn't keep her arms folded. "I thought I was done believing in men like you," she said. "You don't have to believe in me," he replied. "Just believe the door's still open." A breeze stirred. Somewhere down in the fields, the night birds began to sing, and above them all, the stars came out quiet witnesses to a war not fought with bullets, but with something harder: mercy. The days that followed settled over the Granger ranch like a soft quilt, worn but warm. Nothing grand happened. Nothing needed to. The threat was gone. The past, still present, but quiet now. Like a storm seen far off on the plain, still remembered, but no longer overhead. Spring had ripened. The air carried the weight of pollen and soil. the scent of things alive and still becoming. The girls had slipped into their roles not by demand but by rhythm. The boys no longer hovered with caution, but walked beside them, shoulder to shoulder. Not as saviors, not as owners, just as men who'd finally learned to see beyond what was easy to hold. Thomas spent more time on the porch these days, not because he was tired, though he was, but because there was something worth watching against something blooming. Even in old soil, the porch had become a stage for the slow and necessary unfolding of trust. Molly had taken to the garden. She wore no bonnet, let the sun kiss her skin, and didn't flinch when it burned. She planted without speaking, dug with purpose, watered with the tenderness of someone who'd once been left dry too long. Caleb came to her most often now, quiet as ever, but his hands offered more than help. He brought her seeds wrapped in linen, old books on weather and soil, and once a worn ribbon-dyed plum. She accepted with a nod that meant everything. Levi mended the chicken coop for the third time that week. June said he was obsessive. He replied the hinges were stubborn. She rolled her eyes, but stayed close, always within 5 paces, always with one foot pointed toward him. One evening, she caught him watching her when she brushed Mabel's hair and kissed her brow. "You look at me like I'm soft," she said. "I look at you like you survived. Same thing." He didn't argue. Mabel was a different song altogether. She sang now not for others, just to the wind, to the well, to the bread she needed before dawn. She rode bareback in the field behind the barn, her braids flying. The old mare understanding something gentle passing between them, Mark crafted her a small harp from willow and thread. She played it wrong for days, but always with joy. They didn't call what they had a family. Not yet. The words still carried too much weight, but something deeper had rooted. And roots, after all, don't ask permission to grow. They just do it. Was Molly who first brought up the idea? She did it the way she did everything, with care and a touch of fire. She stood on the porch after supper, arms crossed, the sky behind her soaked in lavender. Thomas was lighting his pipe. Levi oiling the hinges on the screen door. The girls were inside, laughing over something Mabel had said. "We've been here months," Molly said. Thomas looked up. "We're not guests anymore. We're not looking to leave. That's the truth. I know." She took a breath. "We'd like to speak to you, all of you." She nodded toward the house. "All of us?" He rose slowly, stepped inside. The boys followed. The 6 of them sat at the table again. No food now, just hands folded, eyes steady. It was June who went first. She never flinched from fire. "I want to marry Levi," she said, "not because he saved me, not because I owe him anything, but because he treats me like I ain't broken." Levi swallowed hard. His hand twitched on the table. Thomas nodded once, no ceremony in the gesture, just quiet acknowledgement. Mark cleared his throat. "I'd like to ask Mabel. She's young," Thomas said. "I'll wait if I have to." Mabel smiled and squeezed his hand. "I don't want him to wait." Thomas looked at her. "You sure?" "Yes," she said. "Makes the world quiet." Then came Molly. She didn't sit straight, didn't smile. She just reached for Caleb's hand and held it. "I spent years thinking love had to be earned through pain. But Caleb, he never asked me to be anything. Just let me be." Blushed, then whispered, "She's already everything." Thomas sat back. He looked at his sons, at the girls who had once stood on a crate like ghosts of their own bodies. He thought of his late wife, her voice in the breeze, her silence in the garden. "You don't need my permission," he said, "but you have my blessing." Married beneath the cottonwoods. The whole town came most, not out of kindness but curiosity. The same folks who'd watched the auction months ago now stood in clean shirts, holding pies and shaking hands. The ceremony wasn't fancy. There were no lace veils or silver rings. The dresses were stitched by Molly and Mabel, simple and soft. June wore her boots. Mabel wore wildflowers in her braid. The boys wore the same coats they'd been baptized in, brushed clean. Thomas stood before them, not as a preacher, but as witness. His voice was rough but steady. "You've seen each other at your worst. It matters more than any promise made in candlelight. You can love after the dust settles. You can love through anything. The vows were plain. June promised to never mistake silence for weakness. Levi promised to speak only when his words were worthy. Mabel promised laughter even on hard days. Mark promised presence even when the wind pulled at his old restlessness. And Molly promised nothing but truth. Caleb promised never to hide from hers. Kissed not as strangers meeting in new skin, but as those who had already built a life. This was just the door marked with their names. That night the ranch glowed. Lanterns hung from trees. Fiddle music swayed the breeze. Mabel danced with bare feet, her harp tucked under her arm. June challenged Levi to a foot race. Molly stood under the stars, Caleb beside her, his hand resting lightly against her back, not to claim, just to say, "I'm here." Thomas sat on the porch, his pipe in one hand, a mug in the other. He watched them, all his sons, his new daughters. The land he'd once believed would outlive joy. Mark sat beside him after a while. "You did good," Mark said. "I just opened the door. Sometimes that's enough." They sat in silence. Crickets hummed soft and steady. Inside, laughter spilled from the windows like warm smoke. Thomas exhaled. Years of grief had etched his face deep, but tonight it felt lighter. The lines had softened. The air smelled of fresh bread and new beginnings. Molly stepped outside alone, holding something wrapped in cloth. She approached Thomas and placed it in his lap. He unwrapped it slowly. It was the cedar dove he'd carved, now painted white, its wings etched with flowers. "We wanted you to have it," she said. He looked at her eyes, unreadable. "You kept us alive," she added. "But more than that, you gave us a place to be." He ran his thumb along the wings. "You gave me something too," he said. She waited. "A reason to finish what I started." She sat beside him then, both watching the lanterns flicker in the trees like stars caught in branches. The porch creaked as others joined. Mabel leaned against the railing, plucking her harp. June brought leftover pie. Caleb fell asleep on the top step. Levi dozed beside him. Mark hummed an old song under his breath. No one said the word home. They didn't need to. It was there in every breath, every touch, every vow carved into air and held firm by kindness. Wind shifted again, gentler now, as if the land itself exhaled. In a world that had once sold them, doubted them, broken them, here they stood, not bought, not beaten, but blooming together. And on that quiet porch, under a sky too wide for words, the past finally gave way to peace.